So, you go to the doctor, you've got a problem, and you explain to the doctor clearly what's wrong. You got a problem with your left hand, and you go to surgery, and the doctor operates on the wrong hand. Is that even possible? Well, if the doctor doesn't speak your language, or you don't speak the language of the doctor well enough, that's going to be a real problem. And what does your insurance cover? You speak part of the language that the insurance is in. Is that even possible? Yes, it is possible, and in fact, it happens all the time. Tonight on the program, we're going to talk with KIRAN. AHUJA. She joins us here. She's the executive director of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and she's visiting us for a variety of reasons. The sign-up period for Obamacare just finished. Yes. We've got a huge conference on social service agencies that deal with a whole bunch of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. That's almost all of us out here. Yes. And language is a huge part of that. Tonight, I was hoping that we could talk a little bit about the President's long-term plans and initiatives for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders with regards not just to health care, but to other social service.
Yeah, and I'm glad you started off around language access, because that is a big component of the work that we do across all these federal agencies that we work with, is making sure not only the information that comes out of the federal government is translated and we provide the interpretation services. Let's say you want to file a complaint related to housing, or we want to make sure, like you said, that there are individuals in the healthcare industry that speak your language, or they can find a way to get those interpreters there so your doctor understands what's going on, you feel comfortable, and the same goes with even around the Affordable Care Act enrollment that just ended, and we have record enrollment numbers of more than 7 million individuals who now can count on health care insurance. And I think a big part of that for us was ensuring that the broader Asian American Pacific Islander community signed up, knew about the benefits, and because many of individuals in our community don't speak English well, we had those interpreters, we translated those documents to make sure that they knew about those benefits and knew how to enroll.
You know that you've got something to say. You know that you want to be heard. Everyone deserves to be on a level playing field, and a big part of the President's initiative is all about that. And we're going to talk with KIRAN AHUJA about that tonight and a whole bunch of other things. Won't you stay with us? This is going to be a great edition of Good Question.
Burn up the bandwidth. Guam's hottest talk comes to your smartphone with News Talk K57's streaming apps. The latest in news, weather, and talk in the palm of your hand. Plus, exclusive features let you talk back to us via email. Visit our webpage and see breaking news on PNC's Twitter page. Smartphone users can now download the free app, which will stream all day, every day, and anywhere. Look in your platform's app store for K57 and download it today.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight on Good Question. My name is Travis Coffman. I'll be your host. Usually I'm hosting the big show on News Talk K57. That's on 570 AM, but not everybody listens to talk radio. We get that, and we've got a really great guest today. We've got KIRAN AHUJA. She's executive director of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, visiting us all the way on Guam. First of all, welcome to Guam.
Thank you. Thank you. I landed last night, so.
Oh, so you are fresh.
I am fresh.
Fantastic. So this is your first trip to Guam?
It is my first trip to Guam.
Now, what brings you out here?
We were out here. We are partnering with PAZUTA, a nonprofit organization, and they're bringing a ton of folks from the various islands. And what we wanted to do on our end was to bring a lot of different federal officials from the different agencies. So we have more than 20 federal officials, and then the idea was to bring them from Washington. I think a large part of the experience is actually to be here. My first time, the first time for many of those individuals from over a dozen federal agencies, really to have a more comprehensive look and conversation around economic development, health issues, homelessness, and also education issues. So we're going to have those conversations over the course of the week.
Oh, okay. Now, the President's initiative on Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, that is a very, well, it's a new thing. Mm-hmm. October the 14th, 2009. What exactly did the President have in mind with this executive order?
Well, I think he reestablished this initiative. It did exist in different forms during the Clinton administration and the Bush administration. But, from his perspective, being from out in the Pacific, understanding the great diversity that exists in our country, that looking at not only the tremendous need in certain segments of the AAPI community, but also the tremendous growth that's taking place across the country. And I think in that sense, he wanted to make sure that the government was being responsive, that we understood who those individuals are. And he talks about, when he signed the executive order for our initiative, that no community should be invisible to its government. So we've been going across the country, roundtables, summits. This is the first major one we're doing in Guam. And I think in particular, we're very excited because there's a whole effort around how many of these federal folks can we bring out here at one time. From people who impact policy in DC. It's one thing for your colleagues to tell you, hey, this is what's going on. It's another to actually be here and to experience it yourself and to hear firsthand.
Now, from what I understand from reading your background, you came to the United States in the 70s and moved all around the country, in the South, in the Midwest, in Florida, and that, as I understand it, had a little bit to do with your interest in this general area.
Yeah, I think it was the experience of being a young person, an immigrant, living in the South or living in parts of the country where there weren't, it wasn't a huge immigrant population, and trying to navigate my way around that. And so that experience really impacted the work that I ended up doing in other minority communities in the South, and then really spending more time understanding the issues that impact the larger Asian American Pacific Islander community. So. Oh,
okay. Well, early in your career, you became a civil rights attorney for Asian Pacific Women's Group.
Well, I was a civil rights attorney for the Department of Justice.
Okay.
So we actually worked on long-standing desegregation cases.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I worked on that. I worked on student harassment cases based on ethnicity and race. And then I ended up running a nonprofit focused on Asian American women. So the work that we're going to be doing with a lot of these nonprofit leaders, I was on the receiving side, trying to figure out how I was going to get the resources, wanting to do work on, let's say it's youth services or domestic violence, all these things. And it's a challenge when you have these good ideas, but you're trying to figure out like and you want to serve your community, like how do you get the resources to do it?
Taking it back to the conversation that has taken place with all of these social service agencies and the meeting that has taken place this week, what are, in your experience, some of the core problems that the AAPI community is missing, is not getting? It sounds like the playing field is not level in a number of key areas.
I think a couple of challenges. One, what I see as a significant challenge is, which is interesting, is really pushing back against the model minority myth in Washington, which is, for the broader Asian American community, we're doing well. We've got the good jobs, we've got the good incomes, and that may be existing for certain segments of the community, but it's a very myopic way or view of looking at this community. And I think for us, it's really important to raise the visibility of the communities that are impacted every day and who are struggling just to make ends meet. A perfect example, we did work following the BP oil spill in the Gulf Coast, working with Vietnamese fishermen. And who would have thought there were 20,000-30,000 Vietnamese fishermen who were in the seafood industry who were impacted by the BP oil spill. Many of them were limited English proficient, didn't speak English well, and had a hard time figuring out how they were going to access these federal resources. I talk about, in Louisiana itself, 40% of all the boats were owned by individuals with Vietnamese surnames.
Really?
Yeah, so I think it's, important that we do these broad strokes, right? And then we don't really dig deep to understand what are the experiences of some of these specific communities. And I think that goes to being out here in Guam, about putting Guam on the radar and putting kind of the issues around health disparities, around education, making sure our kids are graduating on time and knowing that certain segments aren't doing as well as they should, ensuring that our community is getting the small business loans, that they're getting the support and technical assistance, access to federal contracting. I mean, there's just so much out there. And I think that was a big part of what the president wanted to do, was to say, we're opening the doors of government. We want to make sure that any individual out there who wants to work hard and do better for themselves and their family have the ability to do that.
You're just joining us. KIRAN AHUJA is with us. She's Executive Director of AAPI, the White House initiative that we've been talking about, and she's visiting Guam for the very first time.
Yes.
We've got a lot of Asian American Pacific Islanders.
Yes.
In fact, pretty much everyone that lives here outside of me and maybe our friend Heidi would qualify in that category. And we've got a whole bunch of needs as far as everything from health care to affordable housing to getting started in business. And from what I understand, the White House initiative covers a lot of that. Who have you brought out with you this time around?
So we've got about 20 or so federal officials. We have for example, we have a good friend from HUD, from the Housing and Urban Development, who basically works on community planning and development. We have an individual from Small Business Administration who actually has a background in supporting CDFIs from Department of Treasury. We have a number of folks from the VA. We have individuals from Department of Education, and we also have nonprofit leaders, national nonprofit leaders from Hawaii and from the continent who have had the experience of getting federal resources, and now they'll be actually sharing a lot of their experiences and their technical assistance around how to access these resources from the federal government. So it's not just government, it's national nonprofits, it's foundations. We're kind of, we've had the whole gamut of folks and have invited them to come out to be a part of this effort.
Now, in taking a look at the job description that you hold and the very broad task that you face, what do you feel like that you can achieve in the time that you're in office?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think for us, we've, I've been doing this for 4.5 years as executive director, and I know people have their impressions of Washington and how long it takes to get things done. But I think we're making strides. They're baby steps around some of the key issues that we've been working on. And my sense from the community is a large part of it is what's the feel that you get when you're engaging, with us. And for them to know, for myself and a lot of my staff, we all come from doing community work. I mean, and so that's that perspective of understanding we are in a place of privilege of the place where we work and really making these opportunities and these resources accessible. We've made some strides around the language access, around ensuring that information is getting out to the community in their language. And another big issue is around data. So if you don't have, and I know it's kind of this boring topic, but if you don't have data on specific communities, you're not, that doesn't translate into the resources that you're going to need for those communities.
Well, I mean, I believe it. In just some of the early information that you had put out of your office in 2010, you mentioned some 16 million strong members of the AAPI.
Now
This
18.
was in 2010.
It's now 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
30 countries, people from 30 countries, 100 languages. Holy guacamole, how could we even hope to offer services in all of these different languages? How do you begin there?
I think that's the real challenge, that the community is so diverse. And so I think for us, it's, what we've done is we've honed in on specific communities. So we've done, let's say, working on, focusing our work on nail salon workers who are predominantly Vietnamese and Korean, dealing with some serious occupational hazards, fumes in the nail salons. We had a whole effort focused on World War II Filipino veterans, ensuring that they were getting the compensation for their service. So what we've done is we've taken specific segments of a very diverse population and said, okay, how can we address some of the concerns that they have, making sure that the right agencies are coming to the table to talk about those issues.
Well, I can tell you, if you're going to be interested in Asian American Pacific Islanders serving in the military and have brought resources from Veterans Administration, you will be very well received out here, because we've certainly got an underrepresented population when it comes to services compared to their service. You're watching Good Question tonight. KIRAN AHUJA, Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, is with us. We've got a whole host of things to talk about, and we've got more. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more right after these.
Get the story from the Pacific News Center. Get both sides. Get it right. Get it from reporters you can trust. Clint Rogel, Janella Carrera, Betsy Brown, Roselle Romanes, and Kevin Kerrigan. We've got the story. You can get it too. The Pacific News Center. News you can trust.
Welcome back to Good Question. My name is Travis Coffman. I'm your host from News Talk K57. Yep, it's on the radio, but not everybody listens to News Talk Radio. But if you did, you might want to tune in to The Breakfast Show with Ray Gibson as well. Ray Gibson and Patty Arroyo. They're on 570 AM. I'm on the big show in the afternoon, 2 to 6 every afternoon on 570 AM. And you can catch us on the internet and your phone apps as well. But we're on TV because we realize that there are some issues that are so important, we need to get them as many people as possible. And so we've got KIRAN AHUJA with us this afternoon, or this evening rather, she's the executive director from the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and visiting Guam for the first time, and we're so glad to have you here. You've got a whole host of federal officials with you. Now I understand there's a tour involved where you take on some very specific targeted issues in a number of areas around Guam.
And I think this is our way of saying, okay, we need to get out there in the community and go to some of these projects that are funded by federal agencies, some that may not be, but on a range of different issues from housing and health to focus on the veterans community, which I know is kind of a big issue here, to get a good sense directly from those folks that are providing the services about what those experiences are and what we need to know coming from the federal government of how we can support the work that they're doing. So the community tour is a great precursor to the regional conference that we're doing at Guam Community College, which is going to have a whole segment around presentations, not only from folks here in Guam, but from the surrounding islands, kind of reporting to us about what's happening, as well as workshops, panels with the federal officials. And then even a part of this effort is we're doing a technical assistance capacity building workshop to provide, kind of basic information of what works and being able to access federal resources.
Now, what sorts of trips and visits? Earlier in the program, you mentioned going to the BP spill in the Gulf Coast and finding out so many of the boats were owned by owners with very traditional Vietnamese last names. These are the kinds of things I'm sure you learn on these trips. What other sorts of visits have you made across the United States?
No, that's a good question. I mean, we were in Houston last year, and the majority of the individuals who attended our summit were senior citizens. And they were all from different communities, but in particular from the Indian and South Asian community, and were limited English proficient, like didn't speak English very well. And for many of them, this had become a retirement community. They're the first generation. They're basically my parents who have tried to find a way to combat social isolation, create a space where they can support each other, and very interested in the work that we're doing as a part of the initiative. We've spent time in California, in Oakland, California, where there's a growing refugee population from Burma and Bhutan and Nepal.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's going across this country. So I think a part of, again, this idea of being on the ground is getting a firsthand understanding of just the demographics and how things are changing and what are the circumstances of specific communities. I mean, I'll just give one more example. Is in Long Beach, there's a Cambodian community, significant challenges around kids graduating from college or high school even, not getting involved in drugs and gangs, and some significant health issues, a lot of PTSD from just experiences of the Vietnam War. And I think that for us, in one of the largest Cambodian communities outside of Cambodia. So this is kind of the lay of the land of, and I could just go on and on. So I think for us, this is part and parcel of making sure that we have that understanding while we're here in Guam as well.
And people usually forget America's history with immigrants, from decades and centuries past. If you look at, for example, who adopted corned beef and cabbage among the Irish, it's not the Irish from Ireland, it's Irish Americans who couldn't afford the potatoes and beef that they used to eat. And so they were buying pork you know, corned beef and cabbage. They had pork and potatoes in Ireland and corned beef and cabbage in New York because that's what was there. That was what is available, and was you know, important to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. The idea that there are communities in America now that have different ideas about what's important, different set of priorities, being culturally competent, that's something that America's still getting used to in a lot of different ways. You know, what sorts of issues come up stateside with cultural competence?
And I think what you started the program off, I mean, that is essential. I mean, in many ways, the delivery of health services has really taken the lead around what cultural competency means, because if it doesn't work right in that venue, I mean, a lot of things can go wrong. I think also you're seeing it even in serving our students. So those who are taking English as a second language, ensuring that they have the kinds of services they need. And then also just a level of understanding around an appreciation for the diversity within your school. So I think for us, it's building that, you know, really I think, you know, the government really needs, at least on the federal side, needs to take that leadership role and set the standard for what cultural competency means in a lot of the different areas. And I think a part of that is not only building that understanding, but actually employing the people who come from those communities. So a big effort also that we work on is improving the diversity in the federal workforce.
One of the initial areas of focus that was mentioned was enriching schools.
Right.
Are we, is there a setup in the United States right now where there are certain schools that are just inundated with foreign populations, first-generation immigrants, you know, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and are not quite sure how to handle it?
I think that's actually happening all over the country. I mean, and that's the interesting thing from the 2010 census, is that you're not just seeing that growth like in the usual places like California and New York. It's happening in Arkansas. There's a whole segment of Marshallese who've settled there. In Utah, where there's actually a very diverse group of Pacific Islanders that live there. And from Georgia, you know, it looks completely different. Like you know, now when I go back to Georgia, there's actually a county in Georgia that has over, I think, 10% Asian Americans as part of the population, and that just would have been unheard of when when my family came to this country.
America has changed quite a bit since certainly our parents' generation.
Yes.
You know, my grandmother only recently, within the past 10 years or so, tried an enchilada for the first time and told me that she really enjoyed her experience with Italian food. And I thought, you know, we've got a whole different generation of kids growing up now, and they know the difference between Italian and an enchilada, and know about Vietnamese food.
Well, you know, my mom's experiences with, like, one of the things that we talk about is when she came to the U.S., the first thing she remembers is going to McDonald's and asking for a burger without the meat. And they almost looked at her and laughed her out of the store, you know, out of the restaurant, because it was just unheard of. But she was a vegetarian, and this idea of, I'll just eat the bread with a little bit of ketchup and pickles was the way to go. So,
KIRAN AHUJA is with us this evening. She's the executive director of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, AAPI. Just rolls right off the tongue, I imagine, after 4 years. But not so many years ago, you're a young person growing up in the 70s. What struck you as a kid, as a teenager, as a student, as a young adult growing up that said, I need to be involved in this. I need to be involved in making a difference?
You know, I think it was really my parents. My dad is a retired doctor, but he had a clinic in the inner city of Savannah, served a predominantly African-American community, and I saw them day in and day out give so much of themselves. To me, it was instilled that public service and doing that for your community is essential. It should be something that just is like, just what you're made of. And so, you know, I saw my mom being very generous with her time and, you know, just helping out neighbors. You know, even before there were domestic violence clinics and shelters in all different communities, you know, I saw my mom, the aunties, basically taking in women if they, you know, they were in tough situations with a new marriage and things weren't working out or there was abuse involved. I mean, they were coming over to the aunties' houses and getting shelter there. And so I think you saw a lot of that, not necessarily in some a formal setting of a nonprofit organization, but this was kind of I feel like really the initial efforts that were taking place across the, at least in our communities to help our people in need in our community.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of social service agencies that have been around for years and have matured to a degree, and we've got a whole community population of people that don't either feel like they have access or don't know or don't have complete access to these institutions.
Yeah, I mean, you've got some really great examples of where it's been done right. I mean, there have been challenges where it's been over-professionalized. And then you've got maybe even cases here, which is our work with Pazuta, where amazing nonprofit leaders that I've met here and from the different islands who are interested in doing work to support their communities, but just are getting started, right? So that way of like, my mom bringing women into the house. My mom would have no way of knowing how to raise money, how to kind of get a facility and do all those things. But I mean, she was just doing a ton just in her own way. So I think it's also appreciating that and helping the folks, whether it's here with our work with Pazuta or even organizations around the country, at least from our end, to make sure the doors of the federal government are open and they know what those resources are. But we're also trying to build public-private partnerships. So it's not just relying on the government, but how do you bring other resources to support the work you're doing?
Well, tell me an example of where it's being done really well, where things make sense and people seem to be pretty happy with things.
You mean like as far as social services?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, for example, I'm really, really impressed with a lot of the community health clinics in our communities. There's some, and that's where you see cultural competency at its best. So for example, Asian Health Services in Oakland, in Chinatown, pretty extensive operation, serves a very large Asian American Pacific Islander community, but they not only provide those services in a culturally competent way, they also are a vehicle to educate their community to get more involved civically. So it's not just about like coming to get the services, but it's about, we really encourage you to be more active in your community and speak out on things that you care about. So in many ways becomes like a one-stop shop for not just receiving those services, but becoming more engaged.
With so many languages and so many different populations, cultural competence and at least understanding that there are people of different cultural ideas is not something that's brand new to Guam. And in some ways, we've got actually a head start on things from some other places across the United States. One of the things that I recently talked about was a former judge, Elizabeth Barrett Anderson, who was heading up a project to make sure that legal services, legal advice, all things legal, there was always someone around, someone available to deal with any sorts of legal type issues, and talking about a workable way to do this, some kind of clearinghouse, so that there was always someone in just about every situation, whether you were in court, whether it was a real estate transaction, whether someone had arrested you, whether somebody hit your car, those kinds of things. Do those kinds of things exist across the United States for for AAPI folks and other populations? Yeah,
I mean, whether you're talking about legal services or, I think what's been really interesting in seeing the growth of the community, you do see as an initial focus that a lot of the community leaders rally around health issues. Actually, it's a first. I mean, that's like fundamental, right? If you're not getting the health services, but then you see it expand. It's like, do we have lawyers from our community who are like providing those services to the broader community? Do we, support for small businesses? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I think the more the community gets established in an area, the more that they think about the kinds of institutions that they want to create. You're also seeing actually around the country the establishment of these AAPI commissions at the state and local level. So they're also trying to say, how can we build these more direct relationships? I mean, unlike here where I'm learning that Guam is much more like a family and everybody knows each other and you can have that direct line to some of those officials, that's not always the case in other parts of the country. So they're trying to create these institutions that give them a little bit more of a space to build the visibility of the community, but also be able to have that access to officials in their, at the state or local level.
from the White House. She joins us here on the program, her first visit to Guam. KIRAN AHUJA, she's Executive Director of the White House Initiative for AAPI. She's been very generous with her time. We'll be back to wrap things up right after these.
I like that.
Yeah, I like that. You gotta like that.
What's not to like?
Like. I like that. Ooh, I like.
Oh, I definitely like that.
That too. I like that one.
I like it. Like, that's weird.
I like this. Yeah.
There's a whole lot of liking going on. That's right, we're too cool not to like. Like us on Facebook today. What do you like?
I like it.
I like that yesterday.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Good Question. And KIRAN, thank you very much for joining us
It's been
here on the
great
show.
to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you here on Guam. You're here for a short time. I hope this isn't your last visit. If there was one thing that you could do or share with the people of Guam while you're here, what do you think that would be?
Well, I think it's, from our perspective, that the fact that the president created this initiative is just really an important statement that he's made about the, his feeling that we need to ensure that we really reach out to the larger AAPI community, and that we're here to serve the community, and that we want to improve, tackle those barriers and improve access. And I hope that this regional conference is really just a first important step, but a lot of the work is going to happen when we get back to Washington. I think that's something I strongly believe in. It's not just to come and do the FaceTime, but actually the real work is after it. So I hope you'll join us if you can and hang out. It'll be a lot of fun, and I think it's something that we're very excited about and that we've been looking forward to for a while.
Well, fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know a lot of people are interested in it as well. And we'd like to thank you for watching Good Question. I'm Travis Hoffman. Good night.